I had been counting down the days until I could finally leave the chaos of the city behind. The constant noise, the never-ending expectations, the subtle but sharp barbs from family gatherings, they all felt like a weight pressing into my chest. Driving up the winding mountain road, I let the silence wrap around me like a blanket, each turn bringing me closer to a place that had always promised calm. The lodge appeared through the trees, its familiar wooden exterior a comforting reminder that for a few days, the world's judgment couldn't reach me. I parked and stepped out, breathing in the crisp, pine-scented air, feeling a rare freedom settle over my shoulders. Inside, the warmth of the sunlit living room embraced me, and I sank into the worn sofa, letting myself relax. But even as I relished the quiet, my thoughts drifted toward my sister, her habitual schemes lurking like shadows in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that she might somehow find a way to spoil this solitude, even here. Still, for now, the mountains were mine, and I allowed myself the luxury of hope. I opened the front door, expecting the quiet hum of the lodge to greet me, the way it always had when I escaped here. Instead, the first thing I saw was my sister lounging on my favorite armchair, her husband sprawled on the couch, and two of his relatives rifling through my kitchen cupboards. My jaw went slack, and for a moment I couldn't even speak. Did I imagine this? Had I come here to some cruel dream? The sight of them laughing over my perfectly arranged living room made something inside me clench. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of anger, disbelief, and a deep, aching betrayal. What are you doing here? I finally managed, my voice shaking, though I tried to keep it calm. My sister looked up with a smirk, as if this intrusion were perfectly reasonable. "Oh, we just thought we'd make ourselves comfortable while you're busy," she said casually, flipping her hair like it was a trivial matter. I felt heat rush to my face, a combination of humiliation and outrage. My hands shook as I clutched the doorway, trying to process that they had taken over my sanctuary without so much as a thought. Every corner of the lodge they occupied screamed ownership they had no right to. And yet here they were, acting like this was their home. I felt my heartbeat pound in my ears as memories of past betrayals flickered through my mind, each one sharper than the last. Even the neighbor who came by to drop off some mail glanced at the scene with a raised eyebrow. I tried to explain, hoping for some validation, but their looks said everything. They thought I was overreacting. My sanctuary, my mountain refuge, had been hijacked, and suddenly, the peace I had driven so far to find felt like a cruel joke. As I stood there, frozen in my own living room, memories I had long tried to suppress bubbled to the surface. I remembered the birthday parties where my sister always seemed to steal the spotlight, charming our parents while I lingered unnoticed in the corner. I recalled the college scholarship I had worked so hard to earn, only for her to subtly undermine me by spreading doubts about my ability, making our parents hesitate before celebrating my achievement. Even family holidays were a minefield. She always found a way to twist situations so she appeared more deserving, more loved, more important. I remembered one Christmas when I had saved for months to buy a thoughtful gift for our parents, only for her to announce a bigger and better present at the same gathering, drawing all the attention to herself while mine went ignored. These flashbacks weren't just memories. They were patterns, a trail of repeated betrayals and favoritism that left me perpetually second in my own family. And now, seeing her lounge casually in my lodge, claiming it as if she had every right, the anger that had simmered all those years surged like wildfire. I could almost hear the whispered reassurances I had given myself. It's fine. She'll grow up. She'll change. But nothing had changed. The same entitlement, the same disregard for me, played out once more, now in the very place I had hoped would shield me. The lodge, my retreat, had become another stage for her manipulation, and I felt a familiar ache, a mixture of hurt, rage, and the undeniable clarity that this time, I wouldn't let it pass unnoticed. I cleared my throat and tried to steady my voice, forcing it into something calm, though every nerve in my body was buzzing. "So, why exactly are you all here?" I asked, keeping my tone light, almost conversational, hoping to gauge their intentions without giving away the full extent of my irritation. My sister glanced at me, her smirk barely hidden, and replied, "We thought we'd make ourselves at home while you're busy with... well, whatever you're busy with," Her husband chuckled, lounging back in the armchair as if he owned the place, tossing an empty soda can onto the coffee table. One of his relatives leaned against the counter, casually rifling through the fridge. "Honestly, it's just more convenient this way," he added, shrugging like it was the most normal thing in the world. I felt a flare of disbelief mixed with fury. They had no shame, no acknowledgement of boundaries, no hesitation to invade my private space. "Convenient?" I echoed, my voice tighter now, sharp enough to sting. "This is my home. Did you think I'd just let this happen?" My sister laughed softly, the sound smooth and patronizing. "You're overthinking it. It's just a lodge. Relax. Relax?" As if years of my careful planning, my memories tied to every corner of this place, meant nothing. Every casual gesture, every dismissive word screamed entitlement. And suddenly, I realized the challenge ahead was far greater than I had anticipated. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. They believed they were allowed, justified, untouchable. I forced myself to swallow the lump in my throat, my mind already racing, weighing my options. They had tested me, and I wouldn't be found wanting. Not this time. That night, after everyone else had settled into the lodge as if it were theirs, I retreated to my room, closing the door and letting the silence wrap around me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wood-paneled walls, thinking about every moment that had led to this, every slight, every favoritism, every time my sister had taken what was mine. Anger simmered beneath the surface, but I forced it into a controlled burn. I knew that rushing in with fury would only play into their hands. I needed strategy, patience, precision. I imagined reclaiming each space, restoring order, and subtly reminding them that the lodge had always belonged to me. I pictured conversations where I stayed calm while they stumbled, their arrogance unraveling bit by bit. Every plan I constructed in my mind was a test of composure, a way to assert authority without giving them the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. I thought about the windows, the kitchen, even the deck outside. Every inch of this lodge held meaning, and I would reclaim it inch by inch. By the time I finally leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion mixed with a quiet thrill, I felt a small, steady surge of power. The game had begun, and I intended to win. The next morning, I started with the little things. I moved my favorite armchair back to its rightful place by the fireplace, its worn cushions a comfort that no one else could replicate. I rearranged the kitchen, labeling shelves in my handwriting, a small but unmistakable claim of ownership. Every gesture was quiet, almost invisible, but I could sense it. The subtle shift in the air. The way my sister's eyes flicked toward the furniture she had claimed hours before with annoyance creeping in. I spent the afternoon in the living room, carefully placing trinkets and photos that held memories only I could appreciate. Each placement a reminder of the life that had been mine long before they arrived. By evening, I had begun to carve out a private corner of the lodge where no one could trespass without my silent disapproval. I overheard whispered complaints from the kitchen, her husband muttering about rules I apparently hadn't considered, my sister sighing in irritation. The tension was electric, a subtle but powerful shift in control. For the first time, I felt the satisfaction of quiet dominance. They were beginning to realize that the lodge was not theirs to command. Each small victory built momentum, a chain reaction that left me feeling lighter and more confident, while their arrogance cracked under the weight of my steady, unyielding presence. The balance of power was tipping, and I could almost hear their uncertainty growing, a delicious undercurrent to the day's work. By midweek, their annoyance had transformed into open defiance. My sister would parade through the lodge, loudly pointing out what needed improvement in my arrangements, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. Her husband would flash his designer watch or casually mention upcoming vacations, as if reminding me that their wealth made their presence untouchable. One afternoon, I walked into the living room to find them hosting an impromptu brunch, boasting about a new car they had just bought, leaning against my carefully polished countertops as if they were theirs. Each comment, each smug gesture, struck like a small blade, and I felt a sting of humiliation that was both personal and public. I bit back words, feeling the familiar churn of anger rising, but I forced myself to remain composed. My mind raced with plans and possibilities, imagining the perfect moments when they would finally realize they had overstepped. I could feel my heartbeat quicken with suspense, my thoughts dancing between frustration and anticipation. The audience, if they were watching this unfold, would recognize the FOMO, the sense of being replaced, underestimated, dismissed. And in that tension, I found clarity. I wouldn't react in rash anger. Instead, I would let each slight sharpen my resolve, each flaunt fuel the plan that was steadily taking shape in my mind. They might mock me now, but the tide was turning, and they were blind to the storm quietly gathering. It all came to a head one evening when I could no longer stomach the tension simmering beneath polite smiles. I found them sprawled across the living room, laughing at some trivial story, and I knew I had to confront them before the situation spiraled further. "Enough," I said, my voice cutting through the air, sharper than I intended. Their laughter faltered, replaced by a mixture of surprise and irritation. "Enough of what?" my sister drawled, eyes narrowing. I paced slowly, letting the silence stretch, then spoke every thought I had held back for months. For years even. The subtle betrayals, the favoritism, the way they had always assumed my life. My space, my achievements were theirs to trample. Voices rose. Accusations tumbled back and forth, old grievances surfacing like ghosts in the room. I reminded them of past humiliations, the countless times I had been dismissed or undermined. And this time, I didn't soften my words. They flinched, their arrogance cracking under the weight of exposure. Yet still they remained seated, calculating, daring me to escalate. The tension built to a point where the air itself seemed electric, the room vibrating with unspoken threats and fragile egos. And just as I prepared to reveal the next step in my plan, a heavy silence fell. I froze, realizing the moment had arrived. Would they finally leave voluntarily, recognizing their overreach, or would they push further, forcing me into the confrontation I had been preparing for? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud, and I could feel my heart pounding, the suspense unbearable, knowing that whichever path they chose would change everything. I reached into the drawer where I kept the lodge's most important papers, the one place I knew they hadn't bothered to search. My hands were calm. This had been a quiet plan, not a wild reaction. I pulled a manila folder forward and set it on the coffee table, the paper's edge catching the lamplight. "There's something you didn't find," I said. Their amused faces flickered. My sister raised an eyebrow, amused as ever. "What, a secret map?" she mocked. Her husband snorted. I didn't smile. I opened the folder and spread its contents. Deed copies, letters from the estate lawyer, and a single, formal page with a stamp I knew by heart. The clause was precise. The mountain lodge would remain my personal, non-transferable retreat for 5 years, and any occupation without my written consent would be trespass actionable by law. It was dated, notarized, and witnessed. No room for clever excuses. At first they read slowly, eyes tracing lines, then faster, the quickening of realization. My sister's color changed first. She blinked as the words landed. Her husband tried to reach for the page, as if grabbing it could erase the meaning, but his hand hovered. "That's ridiculous," he blurted. "We thought it was abandoned." "Abandoned?" I said, the word a cool blade. "You moved in while I was still alive and made a camp of my home. Convenient, right?" I kept my tone even. I had rehearsed restraint. I knew fury would loosen my grip on the situation. I explained, plain and factual, how I had asked our aunt's lawyer to insert the clause when the property transferred. I described the notarized addendum, the witness signatures, the conversations recorded in letters. I did not shout. I let the document speak with the authority of ink and official stamp. Their arrogance dissolved like sugar in rain. The joke stopped, the laughter cut off mid-sentence. My sister tried to craft a story about misunderstanding, about temporary need, about unfortunate timing. Her husband attempted to reassert control through bluster, tossing out comments about arrangements, about how they had been helping themselves. All of it felt thin beneath the page's certainty. The room shifted. For months they had occupied the lodge with the casual assumption that my absence meant permission. Now the ground under their feet had changed. Power reversed not with spectacle, but with clarity. Authority, documented and undeniable, replaced entitlement. It was not that I wanted them humiliated. I wanted recognition of boundaries and the return of what was mine. I felt a clean satisfaction as I watched their faces work through stages. Denial, bargaining, panic. My sister's composure frayed into quick, sharp breaths. Her husband's jaw tightened. He tried to laugh away the panic, but the laugh sounded thin. They began whispering among themselves, a rustle of plans and counterplans. My sister muttered something about leaving, about making this right. I allowed a moment of mercy. If they cooperated, the matter could remain private. If they resisted, the lawyer would make the rules public and legal, and their choices would carry consequences. "Tomorrow I call the lawyer," I said, sounding ordinary and final. "We can sort this quietly if you leave peacefully and respect the clause. Otherwise, I will enforce it." There was no triumph in my voice, only a steady expectation. Panic spread across their faces. For the first time, their swagger was replaced by calculation. The second power reversal settled over the lodge like a new dawn. They were still here physically, but every gesture was measured now. Every comment weighed. Where before they had lounged like conquerors, they now moved with caution, aware that one careless act could create evidence. I walked through the rooms I had claimed back, feeling a quiet victory seep into the floorboards. It wasn't a triumph of spectacle. It was methodical and irreversible. The documents had turned assumption into consequence. That realization had a strange, clarifying effect on me. Planning was its own kind of strength. Before I closed the folder and returned it to its drawer, I said, "I don't want this to tear the family apart, but I will protect what is mine." My sister opened her mouth to protest, to spin some tale, then faltered. She looked at me not with triumph, but with calculation, trying to determine her next move. That shift told me everything I needed to know. Night settled, and the lodge felt altered. The entitlement that had filled it thinned into brittle civility. I stood at the window, watching the dark mountain silhouette and feeling the pulse of readiness. The proof was in my drawer and in their faces. Morning would bring calls and possibly a lawyer's visit. I closed the curtains and exhaled. The game had changed. The next morning, I knew it was time to end the quiet tension before it turned into chaos. I called in someone neutral, a mediator my family couldn't easily dismiss, a lawyer who had handled other estate matters, someone whose presence demanded attention. I watched my sister and her husband glance at each other, smirks ready, expecting to charm or intimidate as usual. But the moment the lawyer stepped inside, the energy shifted. I presented the documents again, calmly, but this time with witnesses to observe reactions and record responses. My sister tried her usual tactic of minimizing the situation, tossing casual remarks about misunderstandings and temporary stays. Her husband added feigned concern, pretending they had only meant to help themselves while I was away. Each attempt to dismiss me only highlighted their audacity, their entitlement now fully exposed. The lawyer asked questions I had anticipated, and their answers, hesitant, contradictory, and flustered, made the room cringe with discomfort. I could feel my pulse steady as each lie unraveled under scrutiny. Finally, the lawyer turned to my sister with a pointed statement. By occupying the lodge without consent, they were technically trespassing, and enforcement was fully supported by legal precedent. The weight of reality hit them. I watched their faces pale, their body language shift. The arrogance that had filled the lodge for days evaporated instantly. Their whispers of negotiation, the quick attempts at charm, failed spectacularly. My sister's husband sputtered, trying to salvage pride, but each word only tightened the noose of social embarrassment. Even neighbors and caretakers who had witnessed the early chaos exchanged knowing glances, silently affirming my position. For once, the mockery, the assumed superiority, the entitlement, it all backfired. Karma was not loud or vengeful, but methodical, undeniable, and it landed squarely where it belonged. I stood quietly, feeling a rush of vindication, the subtle thrill of justice unfolding before my eyes. The lodge, my sanctuary, had been reclaimed, and the lesson was clear. Disrespect and arrogance have consequences, and those who ignore them often learn too late. For the first time in weeks, the space felt calm and right again, and I could savor the moment, knowing I had restored balance not with anger, but with strategy, patience, and undeniable proof. The lodge finally felt like mine again. The furniture was back in place, the kitchen orderly, and the echoes of laughter that had once grated on my nerves had faded into quiet. Sitting by the fireplace, I allowed myself to breathe, to let the tension of the past days seep away. I thought about my sister and her husband, how entitlement had blinded them, how easily they had assumed control without considering anyone else's feelings. And yet, I also recognized a part of me that had needed this confrontation. The patience, the planning, the courage to stand my ground. I had grown in ways I hadn't realized. Calm under pressure, decisive when necessary, and clear about boundaries I would no longer let others cross. The lodge wasn't just a space. It was proof of what could happen when I claimed my own power. Still, the memory of their arrogance lingered, a reminder that family dynamics are rarely simple. But instead of bitterness, I felt clarity and quiet strength. I had enforced respect without losing my composure, reclaimed what was mine, and learned that sometimes the most satisfying victories are the ones won with strategy rather than rage. Sitting there, I finally allowed myself to smile, knowing that the mountains had restored more than just peace. They had restored my sense of self. Night had settled over the lodge, the mountains dark silhouettes against a fading sky. I poured myself a cup of tea and walked slowly to the balcony, letting the cool air brush against my face. The world outside was still, indifferent, yet in that quiet, I felt the weight of everything that had happened lift just slightly. I thought about my sister and her husband, how their arrogance had crumbled, how every assumption they had made about me had been undone, not with anger, but with quiet, deliberate action. I smiled faintly at the memory of their faces when reality finally caught up, and the satisfaction wasn't loud or vindictive. It was measured, steady, and deeply comforting. Sitting there, I reflected on my own growth, my patience, my clarity, the way I had navigated the storm without losing myself. I knew the family had learned a lesson, subtle yet indelible. I was not someone to be underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. The lodge, finally calm, was more than a home. It was proof of resilience and quiet strength. And as I leaned back, gazing at the mountains, I allowed myself a moment of introspection, tempered with contentment. I was stronger, wiser, and unshakable, and the knowledge of that inner power was a victory no one could take away.